tonight, employing missiles fired from warplanes and artillery. Israeli officials said that tonight we start the payback for the Hamas attack. The barrage came as Israeli leaders were deliberating how to conduct a ground invasion of Gaza with the aim of removing Hamas from power, and as diplomats conducted back-channel negotiations aimed at freeing some of the 229 hostages held by Hamas in Gaza. The lockdown is lifted in Lewiston, Maine, as the manhunt for Robert Card, a 49-year-old white man and Army reservist who had been committed to a mental health facility. Police officers were searching a river and several properties tonight for the gunman who killed 18 people. Finally, authorities have released the names of those who lost their lives in this tragedy. Now, rebranded as X and formerly known as Twitter, the site has experienced a surge in racist, anti-Semitic, and other hateful speech. Now, this all happened under the watch of Elon Musk. Millions of people have been exposed to misinformation about climate change, politics, race, and even the economy. Foreign governments and operatives from Russia to China to Hamas have spread divisive propaganda with little or no regulation or interference. And the GOP House Speaker Mike Johnson, in his first national television interview since winning the Speaker's gavel, offered condolences to the victims of the mass killing that occurred Wednesday night in Maine. The Speaker said, at the end of the day, it's the problem of the human heart. He says it's not guns, it's not weapons. He says we have a right to protect citizens, and citizens have a right to protect themselves, and we do that with the Second Amendment. And that's why our party stands so strongly for that. The White House had an immediate response to the comments of Mike Johnson, basically blaming Americans' hearts for the gun violence and increasing gun violence that we have seen over years, saying, no, the gun violence has nothing to do with our hearts, that it's related to Republicans' refusal to enact common sense gun laws. Donald Trump and 3 of his adult children are scheduled to testify between November 1st and November 6th in the $250 million civil fraud case that alleges years of financial misconduct by the Trump Organization and his children. The announcement of the Trump family's upcoming courtroom appearances was made today after the judge who is presiding over that case ruled that Ivanka Trump, who's no longer a named defendant in the case, may be called by attorneys from the office of New York Attorney General Letitia James. The judge said that a subpoena issued by James's office is valid. Now, Ivanka Trump and her legal team are fighting to quash that subpoena and to have her avoid giving any testimony during this civil trial. Representative Dean Phillips, a Democrat from Minnesota, has announced a long-shot primary challenge to President Joe Biden in the 2024 presidential election. This 3-term congressman, who's worth over $123 million, he's also the 5th richest congressman in our House of Representatives. He argues that Biden has an electability problem and should pass the torch to a younger fellow Democrat. Now, Dean Phillips is 54 years old. He has no complaints or disputes with any of Biden's policies, and in fact has voted 100% in favor of the president's policies. He just says it's time for him to give it up. Now, House Democrats say they are baffled by Phillips' decision to launch a primary challenge of a sitting Democratic president. The donor backlash at the University of Pennsylvania and uproar at Harvard University over Israel and Palestine highlight how big donations often come with demands for changes to university policy and politics. The backlash has raised questions about the influence big donors have and the pressure that they exert over leadership, hiring decisions, and academic affairs. We've seen several billionaire donors to these private institutions say that they are going to withdraw their donations unless the schools fire professors who've issued statements that are supportive of the Palestinians and discipline student organizations and student leaders who've also issued letters in support of the Palestinians. We are also tracking a statement by the Jackson, Mississippi's mayor. He's blaming a communication failure for a botched investigation that kept a woman from learning that her missing son had been killed 7 months before she was notified. He had been killed by a police car and actually buried in a pauper's field. The mayor said that this case is troubling. He admits that mistakes were made, but he says there was no findings or indications of police misconduct or malicious intent. Now, this case involves the tragic death of Dexter Wade, 37 years old, who was killed 1 hour after he left his mom's house, and his mother, who spent 7 months desperately trying to find him, including contacting the same police department over and over and over again. You are listening and watching Areva Martin in real time, and I'm your host, Areva Martin. This is your one-stop destination for today's trending news, expert analysis, and my unfiltered opinions. This is Friday, and typically Avi Bernard would be holding it down, but Avi's off today, and I'm in the seat. This is hour 2, and this is the hour where we go deep, where we dig, where we talk about those stories that have people talking. And if you've had your television on for the last 2 weeks, or you've been on social media, you know one of the biggest stories that people are talking about is the Israeli-Palestinian war. And tonight we heard from an Israeli military leader that they are ramping up their attack, their ground invasion that has been talked about for the last 2 weeks. They said it's time to get revenge on Hamas. That's the terrorist group that staged this surprise attack on Israel, killing over 1,400 people. Palestinians now say, as a result of the constant air attacks by Israel on Palestine, that over 67, and some accounts are 7,000 Palestinians have been killed, including as many as 2,600 children. Now, the UN is calling for a ceasefire, making some pretty strident remarks about Israel. And Israel, in return, is demanding that the UN Secretary General, who made the remarks, that he resign. There's pressure also on Joe Biden, who has requested billions of dollars in aid for Israel. Some progressive members of Congress, as well as some Jewish leaders, other progressive leaders, are criticizing Joe Biden's support for Israel because they say that Israel is engaged in war crimes, that Israel is not limiting its attacks on Hamas, but is in fact killing innocent women, children, and families. We see Jewish organizations like the Anti-Defamation League have written letters to colleges around this country, accusing them of aiding and abetting individuals who are anti-Semitic. So this crisis that's happening thousands and thousands and thousands of miles away from the U.S. has really created a very tense environment for lots of people on their jobs, lots of college students on campuses. And we did a show on this last week. We had 2 historians on trying to help us understand the origins of this crisis. And great show. Obviously, not enough time, 1 hour, to understand the complexity and the nuances of this decades-old crisis. So today, we're looking at another aspect of the war, because I'm determined to help people understand all of these complexities in the best way that I can using this platform. So today I want to focus on religion and the role that religion plays in this war, because my guest from the show a week ago kept using the term Judicide, kept saying that Jewish leaders, particularly the Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, and some of the people in his cabinet wanted to Judicize all of the people in that region. When we come forward, Atalia Omer, she's a professor of religion, conflict, and peace studies at the University of Notre Dame, is going to join us and help us understand and answer this question, hopefully. Is this decades-old crisis about land, or is it about religion? Stay with us. KBLA Talk 1580.
We've got a lot to talk about.
Race, culture wars, political turf battles, criminal justice and injustice, the courts. These are the conversations you won't hear elsewhere. My guests are leading journalists, celebrities, and sports figures, elected leaders, and influencers. They aren't afraid to get into it and say the quiet part out loud. With Areva Martin in real time, your commute just became the most engaging part of your day. Tune in weekdays from 4 p.m. to 6 p.m. or find us on YouTube. Areva Martin in real time, when you want it straight, no chaser.
Unapologetically progressive. KBLA Talk 1580. We've got your black. We've got a lot to talk about.
Hi, I'm Zoe Williams, a.k.a. the Voice of Reason, encouraging you to join me weekdays from 7 to 9 p.m. for the world's most intriguing relationship radio roundtable. Every night, I facilitate and encourage our loyal listeners to participate in the most engaging relationship discussions you'll hear anywhere. So make it a point to rendezvous with me, Zoe Williams, the Voice of Reason, Monday through Friday, 7 to 9 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. Trust me, your relationships will never be the same. The VOR is on fire tonight.
Unapologetically progressive. KBLA Talk 1580. We've got your black.
Here comes the brand new flavor in your head.
Race, social justice, sports, politics, art, music, culture. We do it all on the D.L. Hughley Afternoon Show. If you're not tuning in, then you are definitely missing out. It's the D.L. Hughley Afternoon Show, weekdays from 2 to 4 only on unapologetically progressive KBLA Talk 1580.
Like a brand new flavor in your head.
To boldly go where no man has gone before.
Boldly taking talk radio where it has never gone before. New vistas, new voices, new views, new visions, new victories. We're KBLA Talk 1580, and we're taking public media black.
Follow the leader.
KBLA Talk 1580.
Follow the leader.
If you're not following KBLA Talk 1580 on all of our socials, then you're missing out. Download our app and find us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, and on the web at KBLA 1580.
That's right.
Again, you can find all of our socials at KBLA 1580.
We've got a lot to talk about.
By the way, if you miss any of our weekday shows in real time, you can always catch up by checking out the podcast.
We are back, and in this hour, Dr. Atalia Omer, a professor of religion, conflict, and peace studies at the University of Notre Dame, is joining us. She is also the author of Days of Awe, Reimagining Jewishness in Solidarity with Palestinians and When Peace is Not Enough, How the Israeli Peace Camp Thinks About Religion, Nationalism, and Justice. Thank you and welcome, Dr. Omer.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, this is such a complex subject. I've already, like I said, had two leading historians on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict on a week ago, and I felt like I could have spent 10 hours with them because there are so many complexities and nuances to this decades-old battle between these two groups. But I really wanted to focus on religion today in this show because one of the things one of the historians kept saying last week was that he kept using the word Judicize, and that the current government in Israel under Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and others that he had brought into his cabinet, that he said they weren't interested in a two-state solution. They weren't really interested in sharing the land with Palestinians, that they really wanted to Judicize that entire region. So got me really thinking about the role of religion in this crisis. So can you just kind of give us, again, give us a fifth grade short version? And I know that's difficult because this is complex, but, I want to help people have a better understanding about this Muslim, Jewish, what appears to be the Muslims and Jewish crisis, as much as it is about the land, it seems to be really about religion too.
Yeah, that's interesting because I usually hear the term Judaize rather than Judicize. So that was a bit confusing, which means really making the land, the entirety of what is referred to as historic Palestine, into a Jewish majority population, but more significantly being articulated and ruled according to what the Jewish Israeli human rights organization B'Tselem has called Jewish supremacy in a relatively recent report that described the entirety of what mandatory Palestine, and mandatory refers to the kind of the boundaries that were created by the British mandate. So it's really important to keep in mind the colonial background and the continuous roles of colonial forces or neo-colonial forces in the region, which in a sense also goes to your question about how to understand religion in relation to the recent eruption of or escalation of violence. Because for the people of Gaza, they had lived in a condition of violence for many years. The Gaza Strip had been under siege for 16 years, 17 years. There had been a military occupation for 56 years, since 1967. But in fact, many of the people of Gaza are refugees from the Nakba, or what Israelis, and within that discourse of Zionism is called the War of Independence. And so this illuminates the need to go back to at least 1948. But really, it's very critical to go much deeper historically. And I know that you spoke to other historians, and we can say something about that. But kind of the main point that I want to convey initially with respect to religion is that it's really absolutely critical to be religiously literate. And what I mean by that is that one needs to understand, not in reductive ways, as in kind of like oversimplifying by saying religion is the cause, because that kind of argument would is reductive because it overlooks history, it overlooks politics, it overlooks the kind of dynamics on the ground, it overlooks like what I mentioned before, the colonial infrastructure and the role of colonial forces and sociological mechanisms and dimensions. So religion is not something that is not relevant to understanding the dynamics on the ground. It's important to understand how precisely it is deployed, used, understood, articulated, experienced by people. And also, just another kind of quick note to put on the table, it's also absolutely critical to know that there are many Palestinians who are Christian. And so that very kind of...
So let's start there, because I think there's a notion that all Palestinians are Muslims.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. So that's false.
Yeah, that's false, and it reflects the deeply Orientalist discourse with respect to the region. And it was really reflected in the kind of rhetoric that Biden articulated that in fact sounded very much like Netanyahu, as if he was like Netanyahu was offering, his notes.
So what percentage would you say of the Palestinians living in the Gaza Strip are Christian versus Muslim?
Well, in the Gaza Strip, it's a very small community, but it's a very old and rooted community. In the West and in the West Bank, there are many more Christians.
So let me ask you: so when we talk about this crisis, we should not just focus on Gaza Strip.
Absolutely,
we should be talking about the whole region. Okay.
Yes, absolutely. And actually, I was really. I really appreciated how you started in the beginning of this segment, how you started, you said, no, you didn't say Israel's war with Gaza, but Israel's war with Palestinians.
Okay.
And Gaza is really kind of the most extreme representation of the history of Palestinian.
So let me ask you this, Professor. We've been told that there are 2 million people that live on the Gaza Strip, right?
2.3, yeah.
Okay, 2.3. So outside on the whole West Bank, how many people are we talking about?
At least 7 million.
Okay, so it's kind of, if we think of Gaza Strip as being the city and the West Bank is like a county, so Gaza is a part of this larger region?
Well, part of what Israel has done over the years, and especially since what is called the Oslo Peace Accords, is to very intentionally to fragment the Palestinian community, both in terms of the land, which goes back to your basic question, to fragment the land, to make it impossible to really actually move toward a contiguous Palestinian state alongside Israel. So Gaza was fragmented from the West Bank, but historically, these were communities that were entirely interwoven.
Okay, so historically, Gaza was interwoven with the West Bank.
Yeah.
And was it occupied by Jewish people or occupied by predominantly Muslim, but some Christians?
Okay, but it's really important to go back a little bit and just offer some kind of like timeline. So we have we can start, actually. It's really important to say, okay, we start in 1917 with the Balfour Declaration, when a British lord gives the land to the Jews to establish a Jewish home. At that time, in historic Palestine, there were only 6% Jewish people. Mostly were from the place. I mean, they didn't come from Europe. By 1947, when the United Nations voted on a partition plan, there were 33% of Jews in the land, and they were given 55% of the land by the UN, while the Palestinians, the indigenous people, own 94%.
What did you say? 53 and what percent?
55%. The UN partition gave kind of articulated 55% for the Jews, even though they were only 33%. And at the
it gave them a larger section, and 45 to the indigenous people.
55, but at the time, the indigenous people own 94% of the land. But then you have the Nakba, the catastrophe, and Israel, what is called proper Israel, that was established in 1948, is over 78% of the land. And then you have the occupation of 1967. The occupation of 1967, this is when Israel occupied the Gaza Strip from Egypt and Sinai as well, the West Bank from Jordan, and the Golan Heights from Syria. And at that point, things kind of shifted around, but Gaza and the West Bank were interconnected until Gaza was put under siege and fragmented from the rest.
So let me ask you this. So the occupation that you said, so UN split the land, gave Israel a certain portion. Israel then annexed annexed some portion of the West Bank and the Gaza Strip, expanding its footprint, right?
Yeah, it established occupation over all this space.
Okay, and let's talk about religion now. So did that occupation of that space, this larger space, was that because fundamentally the Israelis believed that that entire land was somehow ordained by some biblical purpose, like God, this was, their chosen land?
No, some people, some movements that especially emerged to the foreground in the 70s after the 73 war, the Gush Emunim, the Messianic settlers, they are explicitly religious in the sense, their Zionism is explicitly religious in the sense that they see the historical moment as the Messianic moment of return to the land. But secular Zionism that emerged in Europe as a secular movement nevertheless relied on what I called a biblical grammar. Because it needed to bring together Jews from all over, supposedly to the land they were dreaming about, that had kind of redemptive meaning. So even in the secular discourse, that it's very nationalistic and secular, I understand people in the return to the land as something that happens historically, not in some messianic and meta-historical moment, and human-initiated, not divine-initiated. Still, it needed to kind of draw on the religious imagination in order to generate an actual political traction for people to actually move to the land.
All right, I'm going to have you hold your thought. When we come forward, we're going to continue with this history lesson and better understanding of how the Israeli nation grew and expanded its footprint and what that growth meant for the Palestinians and the indigenous people in this region. Stay with us, KBLA Talk 1580.
There's a new sheriff in town.
All right, I'm Dr. Nicordelai Corte, and starting September 18th, I couldn't be more thrilled than invite you to join us for the launch of A More Perfect Union. Weekdays right here on KBLA Talk 1580. Weekdays from 1 to 2 p.m. Pacific Time. That's 4 to 5 p.m. Eastern. A More Perfect Union promises to deliver national news of consequence, informed opinion, and analysis beyond the headlines. As KBLA Talk 1580's chief national political analyst, every day you can expect your daily dose of political news of consequence. If you're looking to be engaged, enlightened, and empowered to be a part of the solution to issues related to national politics, elections, identity, culture change, and social justice, A More Perfect Union was designed for you. This daily political affairs show will feature notable journalists, industry leaders, lawmakers, change makers, tastemakers, and ordinary people motivated to do their part to reach beyond today's divisions, to make sense out of news of the day, and offer us all a chance to build a more perfect union. Come on and join me.
KBLA Talk 1580. We've got a lot to talk about. We've got a lot to talk about.
Hi, I'm Ray Richardson, your sports connection here at KBLA Talk 1580. Join me and my co-host Neil Scarborough every Saturday night at 7 for Out of Bounds, the show that brings some flavor to the world of sports for 60 minutes. We take you beyond the scores and press conferences. We give you our point of view, the way black folks see what's going down. You can join the conversation and give us your analysis at 1-800-920-1580. Out of Bounds every Saturday night at 7 on KBLA Talk 1580. We've got a lot to talk about.
Unapologetically progressive. KBLA Talk 1580. We've got your black.
You like the style, though.
We've got a lot to talk about.
I'm Reverend Gerald, the life coach. Is someone you love struggling with addiction and mental illness? Is improving your family's health important? Want to leave a legacy that your family can grow? Are you ready to enhance your perception of life experiences? Then wake up weekends at 7 a.m. with Urban Family Focus and get the wisdom, opportunity, resources, and motivation to live your best life. Join the conversation on Urban Family Focus Saturday and Sunday at 7 a.m.
Unapologetically progressive. KBLA Talk 1580. We've got your black. We've got a lot to talk about.
Race, culture wars, political turf battles, criminal justice and injustice, the courts. These are the conversations you won't hear elsewhere. My guests are leading journalists, celebrities, and sports figures, elected leaders, and influencers. They aren't afraid to get into it and say the quiet part out loud. With Areva Martin in real time, your commute just became the most engaging part of your day. Tune in weekdays from 4 p.m. to 6 p.m. or find us on YouTube. Areva Martin in real time, when you want it straight, no chaser.
Unapologetically progressive. KBLA Talk 1580. We've got your black. We've got a lot to talk about.
Hi, I'm Zoe Williams, a.k.a. the voice of reason, encouraging you to join me weekdays from 7 to 9 p.m. for the world's most intriguing relationship radio roundtable. Every night, I facilitate and encourage our loyal listeners to participate in the most engaging relationship discussions you'll hear anywhere. So make it a point to rendezvous with me, Zoe Williams, the voice of reason, Monday through Friday, 7 to 9 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. Trust me, your relationships will never be the same. The VOR is on fire tonight.
Unapologetically progressive. KBLA Talk 1580. We've got your black.
Here comes the brand new flavor in your head.
Race, social justice, sports, politics, art, music, culture. We do it all on the D.L. Hughley Afternoon Show. If you're not tuning in, then you are definitely missing out. It's the D.L. Hughley Afternoon Show, weekdays from 2 to 4 only on unapologetically progressive KBLA Talk 1580.
Like a brand new flavor in your head.
We boldly go where no man has gone before.
Boldly taking talk radio where it has never gone before. New vistas, new voices, new views, new visions, new victories. We're KBLA Talk 1580, and we're taking public media black.
Follow the leader.
KBLA Talk 1580.
Follow the leader.
If you're not following KBLA Talk 1580 on all of our socials, then you're missing out. Download our app and find us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, and on the web at KBLA 1580.
That's right.
Again, you can find all of our socials at KBLA 1580.
We've got a lot to talk about.
By the way, if you miss any of our weekday shows in real time, you can always catch up by checking out the podcast of your favorite shows at your leisure. At KBLA Talk 1580, we've got your black.
Follow the leader. Oh my God. Follow the leader. Follow the leader. Follow the leader. Follow the leader. Follow the leader.
Gotta stay fresh, my house shot with a rest spot.
Have you visited us online for the grand opening of KBLA.store? For the best in new merch, gift ideas, books, media, and more, log on to KBLA.store. Be sure to check out our KBLA team favorites at KBLA.
We are back with Professor Atalia Omer. She's a professor of religion, conflict, and peace studies at the University of Notre Dame. She is also the author of Days of Awe, Reimagining Jewishness in Solidarity with Palestinians. She's also the author of When Peace is Not Enough, How the Israeli Peace Camp Thinks About Religion, Nationalism, and Justice. She's here trying to help us get a better understanding of the decades-long Israeli-Palestinian crisis. Now, I think it's appropriate to call it war, and the role that religion plays in it. Okay, Professor Omer, you were expounding on this point that over time, the Israelis occupied more and more of the land, leaving less land for the indigenous Palestinians who were in this region. And I had asked if the quest for more land was based on some biblical principles. And I think your answer was not really. It was more about nationalism. Did I get that right?
It's also nationalism and also religion. I mean, it's selectively the nationalism that was constructed in Europe in the context of anti-Semitism, and also in the context of Europe's other European ills like Orientalism, like the genocidal. Europe is a genocidal project. Settler colonialism was in the air in the late 19th century, early 20th century, and so it has to be Zionism as a Jewish national movement needs to be understood as a European movement, but it was constructed through a reliance on the biblical narrative. Now, it's very, very important to note that Zionism that emerges as a secular movement as a political movement, political Zionism, there are other forms of Zionism, was perceived by the religious leaders of the community in Europe, the Orthodox leaders, the Haredi leaders, as a very deeply subversive movement. because within the Jewish tradition, first of all, the Jewish tradition doesn't only rely on the text of the biblical text. It entails centuries and centuries of learning, interpretation, hermeneutics, commentary upon commentary upon commentary. And from the perspective of the rabbis, the return to the land should have been something to be postponed. And it's about waiting for a messianic agency, not human agency.
Let me ask you this. So did the conflict start because it was essentially a fight over the land, the indigenous people responding to the carving out of more land by Israelis? Was that was that the impetus, or was it the opposite, where the Israelis were in conflict with the indigenous people because they wanted to take more and more land? I'm trying to make, I want to try to simplify this. I know it's not that simple, but I don't want people to leave more confused.
Yes. I can unpack it. So first of all, I want to say to make sure that I said earlier the numbers correctly. There are about 7.5 million Palestinians throughout what is now historic Palestine. So we know about everybody knows about Gaza. Now many of them are systematically being killed. But there are also 20% of Israeli citizens are in fact Palestinians. Those are the people who remain within 1948 boundaries. And then the remaining Palestinians are in the West Bank.
Okay.
So this is very important. From a Palestinian perspective, the resistance emerged because some people came from Europe and systematically started purchasing land. And once they realized that there is something systematic going on, resistance was articulated. Sometimes this resistance drew on religion to mobilize people, because religion is very effective in terms of mobilizing people. So then maybe some of the articulation of the resistance appear to be religious, but in fact they are about, from a Palestinian perspective, from the Palestinian experience, what they have experienced is an experience of settler colonialism. There is a group of people who came and systematically took over their land. Okay. Settler colonialism is about land. It's about,
and so the resistance movement grew because they were trying to resist the people who came to occupy or annex their land.
And so settler colonialism is about, and has been, and that has been also the policies of Israel over the years. First Zionism, the Yishuv, so the pre-state, and then Israel, how to maximize land and minimize the indigenous people, the Palestinians on that land. Mm-hmm. That kind of process needs justification. It cannot just be, it cannot happen, it cannot unfold without a reliance on particular narrative.
So what was the narrative that Israel used to justify the taking of more of the indigenous land of the Palestinians?
Yeah, so this is where it's really important to understand the kind of its dialectic. So you have the arguments that the different parties are making are not in kind of like a vacuum from one another, but they're in conversation with one another. So Zionism that started in Europe as a European movement, secular, nevertheless relied on the story, on the biblical narrative about this is our land, this is our birthplace. For the Jewish people to be normal, that's very, very kind of this notion of the normalcy has been very, very central, was very central to the early Zionist movement. Like other nations, it needed to return to its home, to its roots.
Okay.
And so in the early narratives of Zionism, you have a kind of reliance on, and again, this is what I call kind of the biblical grammar, because you have a reliance on Joshua, the book of Joshua, and the conquest of the land. And of course, in that story, there were people in the land too. And also the narrative about return and redemption.
Okay, so we get that was a part of the narrative. Yeah. Did Palestinians have the Muslims who were living in this area, who were indigenous Palestinians, did they have a religious narrative about Muhammad?
I mean, first of all, yes, there is a religious narrative about the role, the significance of Jerusalem and the land within Islam. But from a Palestinian perspective, if you study kind of the history of the resistance to colonialism, really from the Palestinian perspective, I mean, from the Jewish perspective, it's homecoming. It's a return. From Palestinian, it's resistance to these people who are coming and displacing and depopulating me. And so yes, Jerusalem is significant. It's the third sacred city in the Islamic context.
What was the significance, Professor, of Donald Trump supporting moving Jerusalem? Or moving, I guess, talk about what Donald Trump did in terms of the moving of the major city in Israel.
Well, Donald Trump moved the embassy, the American embassy, from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. That was a very significant and provocative move because, and also it came with declarations that Jerusalem is the capital of the Jewish people. And the issue is not about, again, to go kind of to your question, for Muslims, it's not about Jerusalem being a Muslim city. It's a Palestinian city, and with a significance for Palestinians. And within the framework of the peace negotiations, the peace process that was going on for 30 years, until.
But wait a minute, before the movement of the American embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, Jerusalem was occupied by the Palestinians?
No, West Jerusalem was a part of the territories that were established in 1948. East Jerusalem was occupied in 1967. So often Palestinians refer to East Jerusalem as occupied East Jerusalem. But within the peace negotiation, the peace framework of the Oslo Accords that was signed in 1993, there was a possibility of Jerusalem becoming also a capital of the future Palestinian state.
Okay.
Go ahead. It's not only about the move of the embassy, but it's also about Trump very much undergirded by Christian evangelicals in the U.S. And their Christian Zionism. He also said this is the eternal city of the Jewish people.
Okay. And the Palestinians, because of the peace accord, had expectations that if there was going to be a two-state solution, that Jerusalem would be in the camp of the Palestinians.
That it will be maybe the seat of the Palestinian.
Okay. So that was a big blow to the Palestinians for Trump to intervene and say this, we're going to move the Israeli embassy, the American embassy in Israel to Jerusalem, and now declare that Jerusalem is forever a Jewish city.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So that's really important because, now there's this backlash against Joe Biden and folks suggesting that somehow Donald Trump is a better friend to the Palestinians than Joe Biden. So, okay. Why history is important, right? We got to get some news in. When we come, it's such an interesting conversation. Stay with us, KBLA Talk 1580. We're going to come back with Dr. Omer. She's going to keep helping us understand this decades-old conflict and, religion versus land. Stay with us.
We've got a lot to talk about.
Hi, I'm Ray Richardson, your sports connection here at KBLA Talk 1580. Join me and my co-host Neil Scarborough every Saturday night at 7 for Out of Bounds, the show that brings some flavor to the world of sports for 60 minutes. We take you beyond the scores and press conferences. We give you our point of view, the way black folks see what's going down. You can join the conversation and give us your analysis at 1-800-920-1580. Out of Bounds every Saturday night at 7 on KBLA Talk 1580. We've got a lot to talk about.
Unapologetically progressive. KBLA Talk 1580. We've got your black.
You like the style, though.
We've got a lot to talk about.
I'm Reverend Gerald, the life coach. Is someone you love struggling with addiction and mental illness? Is improving your family's health important? Want to leave a legacy that your family can grow? Are you ready to enhance your perception of life experiences? Then wake up weekends at 7 a.m. with Urban Family Focus and get the wisdom, opportunity, resources, and motivation to live your best life. Join the conversation on Urban Family Focus Saturday and Sunday at 7 a.m.
Unapologetically progressive. KBLA Talk 1580. We've got your black. We've got a lot to talk about.
Race, culture wars, political turf battles, criminal justice and injustice, the courts. These are the conversations you won't hear elsewhere. My guests are leading journalists, celebrities, and sports figures, elected leaders, and influencers. They aren't afraid to get into it and say the quiet part out loud. With Areva Martin in real time, your commute just became the most engaging part of your day. Tune in weekdays from 4 p.m. to 6 p.m. or find us on YouTube. Areva Martin in real time, when you want it straight, no chaser.
Unapologetically progressive. KBLA Talk 1580. We've got your black. We've got a lot to talk about.
Hi, I'm Zoe Williams, a.k.a. the voice of reason, encouraging you to join me weekdays from 7 to 9 p.m. for the world's most intriguing relationship radio roundtable. Every night, I facilitate and encourage our loyal listeners to participate in the most engaging relationship discussions you'll hear anywhere. So make it a point to rendezvous with me, Zoe Williams, the voice of reason, Monday through Friday, 7 to 9 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. Trust me, your relationships will never be the same. The VOR is on fire tonight.
Unapologetically progressive. KBLA Talk 1580. We've got your black.
Here comes the brand new flavor in your head.
Race, social justice, sports, politics, art, music, culture. We do it all on the D.L. Hughley Afternoon Show. If you're not tuning in, then you are definitely missing out. It's the D.L. Hughley Afternoon Show, weekdays from 2 to 4 only on unapologetically progressive KBLA Talk 1580.
Like a brand new flavor in your head.
To boldly go.
We are back with Professor Atalia Omer. She's a professor of religion, conflict, and peace studies at the University of Notre Dame, and she's trying to help us understand this very complex, ongoing crisis between Israelis and Palestinians, and we're trying to really unpack this issue about land versus religion. So thank you for clarifying the move of the American embassy to Jerusalem, what that meant for, obviously, Israelis. That was a big coup for them. To have a U.S.
Some of them.
Okay, some of them. So, and that's important to note because I think people think Israelis are monolithic. Mm-hmm. So help us understand, because we've seen some Jewish leaders in the U.S. Protesting with Palestinians and protesting against the aid that the Biden administration wants to send to Israel. So obviously, we're not talking about a monolithic group.
Yeah, and those are American Jews. So that's really important, not to conflate Jews with Israelis, which is exactly what those American Jews who protest in D.C. and in other places, especially the movement of Jewish Voice for Peace, and if not now, and others, what they say, first of all, don't do it in my name, because this is how the discourse happens. And you heard it in Biden's speech and Blinken and all this other speech. First of all, Biden said Hamas' sole purpose is to kill Jews. Well, no. I mean, this is where you need to contextualize Hamas as a movement of resistance within what we talked about before as a Palestinian resistance. Yes, they, violated international law. They engage in atrocious acts of violence. But one needs to understand the kind of violence that the people of Gaza and Palestine broadly, we kind of recontextualize Gaza within the border Palestine, the borderland, what they experience.
Great point. Why is it that if you make the statement you just made, yes, it's atrocious what the Hamas terrorists did in killing 1,400 Israelis, but you have to put in context how the Israelis have treated the Palestinians. So the UN Secretary for the United Nations, made that statement. And immediately some of the Israelis leaders called for his resignation. And we've seen other American Jewish leaders call people anti-Semitic, demand that students who've written these statements be fired from jobs, et cetera, et cetera. Is that is that an anti-Semitic statement to say the terrorist attack is horrific and illegal, yet the treatment of Palestinians is equally, or not even equally, but just that it's horrific?
Yeah, no, it's not. But the issue is that the discourse, the narrative, has been conflating Jewish people and Zionism and Zionists, and also just support of Israel no matter what, with no questions, with no interrogation. I mean, Israel is just a nation state. It's a state. So to be critical of state violence is not the same of singling out a whole group of people for being, X or Y or Z. And so this is really critical, and this is exactly, and you mentioned my book, Days of All Reimagining Jewishness in Solidarity with Palestinians. This is exactly what I trace in the book, how, and looking specifically at American Jews in this context, how they interrogated that, first of all, kind of the homogenization of Jewish history and Jewish narrative, that what does it mean to be Jewish? It means to support Zionism. They challenge it, say no, and they also say, occupation is not my Judaism. This is what the kind of T-shirts that many of those young Jews are wearing when they are doing different kind of actions. But then they want to ask, well, what is my Judaism? This is just to say that religion is many different things, and it can be reinterpreted and interrogated.
Why is so? You're saying there's been this conflation between the state of Israel, any state, and Judaism, which.
Yes.
Is it a race? Is it a religion? That's what makes this also really complicated. And this notion, like I said, if you say that Palestinians have been living in the largest open air prison in the world, that too is considered anti-Semitic.
Yeah. And this is an outcome of a long-standing effort to control the narrative, to control how you can talk about Israel. How can you talk about Palestine, even mention the word Palestine, in the kind of policing and silencing that have been going on, and especially targeting people who are vulnerable. So the fact that these Jewish actors were able to go and protest in Washington, D.C. in the way they did, in and of itself is a form of privilege. They're able to do it and say it and be explicit in their criticism. And yes, a few of them were arrested, but were released a few hours later.
We're going to run out of time. We got so many questions to ask. Let me just jump to this.
Yes.
The two-state solution. Mm-hmm. We hear a lot about that. My historians last week said that Netanyahu is not interested in a two-state solution, and that will never happen under his regime. And again, is the whole nation, the whole state not interested, or that's just that political party?
Yeah, and this is really important. I mean, like I mentioned before, the peace accords, the Oslo Accords, they were signed in 1993, and we just marked the 3 decades, so 30-year anniversary of it. And everyone at the time of the 30-year anniversary were completely disillusioned with the framework and what it entailed, and especially Palestinians. From a Palestinian perspective, the quote-unquote peace process has been another modality of entrenching the occupation in the West Bank, and of course the Gaza, with its own kind of extreme situation, the Gaza Strip. So yeah, but Netanyahu is just one actor within a much more radicalized political landscape. The whole the government, the coalition that he built with the help of very, very extreme people who are messianic, like what I talked about earlier, who really understand the land. First, really look at the biblical text as a title, as a land title, and are explicitly Jewish supremacists. They don't even have the pretense that earlier governments and earlier kind of modalities of Israeli political discourse had with respect to kind of the liberal veneer of the question of democracy. That contradiction between Jewish and democracy, Israel sees itself as a Jewish democracy, this contradiction is falling apart. This is what we are seeing.
So is it possible, if Netanyahu is not in office, if there were these more liberal leaders, there could be more interest in developing a two-state solution?
No, at the moment, the atmosphere is so extremist and deeply Jewish supremacist because of decades of being in that situation and having to, it's harder. It became harder and harder and harder to justify what Israel has been doing through kind of a liberal secular discourse. This is why the discourse became more and more religious, explicitly relying on that kind of as a warrant, as a license to dominate a whole group of people, the Palestinians, and in addition to this, Israel has been enabled, especially by the United States, all this time, and we see now even it's even intensified in the current moment. So there had not been a possibility for an alternative voice to really emerge politically, because Israel is just being rewarded for bad behavior in terms of its practices vis-a-vis the
Wow, we are out of time, Professor Omer. Such an interesting conversation. I have so many other questions to ask, and I'm sure my listeners do as well. I'll have to have you back again. Thank you so much for enlightening us on these very, very complex issues. I know I'm a lot smarter as a result of having listening to you and having a better understanding of this history, and I hope my listeners are as well. But like I said, we have to go to the next show, which is Robin Ayers and the Raw Report right here on KBLA Talk 1580. Don't touch that dial.
We've got a lot to talk about.
Are you interested in catching up on all the latest entertainment news, trending topics, and exciting interviews? I got you. Tune in to The Raw Report with Robin Ayers, Monday through Friday, 6 to 7 p.m. I'm your host, Robin Ayers. Join me every weekday with some of the best entertainment